The title of this morning's discussion is In But Not Of. Now, the way I was led to today's reading and topic actually occurred this past Tuesday when I was at Chesapeake District Conference. There was one of the speakers there from one of the Wesleyan colleges referenced the book of Daniel and its relevance, especially for the youth of today and the mission of their school. And it really got me reflecting on Daniel and not just the relevance for youth, but I think for all of us. I don't know if people have noticed or not, but we live in a kooky world. and uh, and I think every generation, I think we all say, "Oh my gosh, it's crazier now than it ever was." Um, but my suspicion is the world's always been crazy. we as we get older, it just feels crazier. But what Scripture constantly reminds me of is the more things change, the more they stay the same. And so in Daniel, it's of course in the Old Testament, but when we look at the New Testament, and you've heard me reference this before, as you've heard many preachers and you've read yourself, that Scripture reminds us that we are in this world, but we are not of this world. And so we're going to explore that a little bit, but we're going to explore it in the Old Testament. And as many of you know, anytime I can point to Jesus Christ in the Old Testament, man alive, I get excited because it's a reminder that God is God from the beginning to right now to whatever's around the corner. Now, in the book of Daniel, starting off, we have this guy, Nebuchadnezzar, who basically defeats the Jewish people, and he takes a group of young men hostage and to send a clear message to Jerusalem, reminding them not to revolt. And the book of Daniel follows one of those young men and how God ended up using him in a mighty way, despite the fact that Daniel and his companions were pulled out of their home, thrust into a very crazy situation, and God brought them through and did some really, really cool things. And in fact, if you look at a lot of the movies and literature for young adults, the Percy Jackson series and everything else, and all the other things that movies are being made of, let me tell you, it started here in the book of Daniel. This was the Old Testament. That's has some really cool stories, and I'd love to see more of these made into movies. But we're going to start off in Daniel chapter 1, and I'm going to point out different highlights of the scripture, verse 3 through 17. Not going to go word for word through just because of our time, but I want to point out some very interesting things, and I believe they're really good parallels for some of the things happening today, and gives us good guidance in how to navigate through this world. So, as I had stated, Nebuchadnezzar had taken a bunch of the Jewish people, particularly the young, and he held him hostage. It was all part of the way he ruled. And truth be told, Nebuchadnezzar was pretty successful in his endeavors. But the thing is not only did Nebuchadnezzar take the holy things, which was very often the practice. What is the expression? To the victor goes the spoils. So when Nebuchadnezzar confiscated all the holy things out of the temple, he not only took the gold and the shiny things and so on and so forth, he took the future. He took young men, and from reading up on it, the age range looks to be from like 13 to 17 years old. So if we think about our youth, 13 to 17, that is the future. And so in a lot of ways, what Nebuchadnezzar was stealing or stole was not just what was valuable in terms of the treasures of the temple, but it was his attempt to steal the most precious thing, the future. And why is it that even today we acknowledge how precious the younger generations are? Because they are the future. They're our future. They're the future leaders of our country, of our nations, our communities. They're the ones whom, quite frankly, we put our hopes and dreams in. And here Nebuchadnezzar's took them and had his own plans. And so when he took them, he was very selective. He wanted those who had, without physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude of every kinds of learning, well-informed, blah, blah, blah. So basically what he did is he looked at them and he said, I want the best of the best. And he wanted the best of the best to do one very simple thing. He wanted to groom them for civil service. And grooming, that's a word we hear today, isn't it? And so it was in his intent that they would be taught the language and literature of the Babylonians, and they would be put to work. And in this, part of this was that they were to be assigned that they would be eating a certain amount of food and wine from the king's table. Now, that's significant for quite a few reasons. So, first off, in this ancient time, there was a huge difference between what the king ate and what the common people ate. Today, we might compare that between getting a burger at Burger King and versus a steak at Le Bec Fin. And if you don't know what that is, it's some fancy schmancy restaurant. But really, the difference at that time was even greater. There was an even greater difference between how the king would have eaten and the common people than how, say, a billionaire would eat today and a middle class person. A greater distance between the two, greater difference than at that time. And so it's important for us to remember, because it would be, I don't know if any of us, at least in this culture here, could really truly appreciate the difference between the food at the king's table and what the common people of that time ate, because we don't really have quite the equivalent of it in our society today. The closest we could get would be maybe someone living off of franks and beans, or getting their meals in a homeless shelter, and someone eating, having a private chef. And again, even that probably wouldn't quite even be the equivalent of what we're talking about here. And there's one particular young man I see out there. He's biting his tongue. He's quite the historian. I know he wants to just jump up and tell us all about it, but that can wait until after service. The other thing is to be able to have the same food and wine prepared prepared for the king was also a special honor. So there's the physical difference between the food, so the people able to eat off of the same food from the king's table would certainly be living high off the hog. But more than that, there was also a social status that was attached to this. It was considered a tremendous, tremendous honor. And so these young men were to not only be trained for 3 years, but they were also to partake in this same food. Now, amongst those who were chosen, of course, was Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azra. And I know that I am butchering their names, and that's okay, because when you find something you're good at, you stick to it. And I can butcher names like no one else. But it's interesting, and I remember when I first started studying Scripture, and particularly the Old Testament, but even the New Testament, if you think about when Jesus assigned people new names, and we see in the Old Testament where God assigned individuals new names. And typically, it was the name had significance in terms of how that person was going to be used by God, who that person was in God. And then we even see in Scripture where people were named by their own parents based upon the circumstances of the child's birth. And so the names of the individuals in the Bible tell a story about that individual. And here we have Nebuchadnezzar had these individuals renamed. And with their new names, and so if we look at what their real names are, and then if we look at what Nebuchadnezzar or the Babylonians named them, it's very interesting. For example, Daniel, which means God is my judge, was changed to Belshazzar, meaning Bel's prince. The name Hananiah, meaning beloved by the Lord, was changed to Shadrach, meaning illuminated by sun God. The name Mishael, meaning who is as God, was changed to Mashach, which means who is like Shach, which some believe was a Babylonian goddess corresponding with Ishtar or Venus. And the name Azra, meaning the Lord is my help, was changed to Abednego, meaning servant of Nego. And it's interesting because what struck me when I was reading up on this and the changing of the names was, if you notice, their actual names all related to their place and their relationship with God. And what the Babylonians did was they changed their names to do with the pagan gods, rulers, and their culture. Completely opposite everything of who they really were. Then we get to verse 8, where Daniel refused to defile himself with the royal food and wine. Now, what's interesting is if we look at what Daniel did, he drew a line in the sand, so to speak. He didn't make a big deal about certain things, but others he did. And there are certain things that was very important that he had to stand by. And it reminds me of where many of us may find ourselves in navigating in the world today. Where do we draw that line? What are the things we're willing to accept and go with? And what are the things that we say, no, that's not happening? You see, Daniel realized that his relationship with God was connected to his diet, to what he ate. And if we think about it, there's a certain amount of symbolism here, because where did the original sin come from? The consumption of the forbidden fruit. Food for thought, pun intended. But the thing is Daniel and his friends considered the king's food defiled for at least 3 reasons. First, it undoubtedly was not kosher. And if you know anything about the Jewish culture and tradition, kosher is very important. Second, that food was most likely sacrificed to false idols. And third, remember I mentioned about how the consumption of the food of the king's table was a great honor. It also would be an implied fellowship with the Babylonian cultural system. And so for Daniel, this was the line. And it's interesting because Daniel did not object to the Babylonian education because he knew what he believed. He didn't even really object to the names that were given because amongst themselves they could call each other by their proper name. But when it came to ingesting that which they should not, Daniel said, no, can't do this one. And then from there, he was able to negotiate with the official who was over him. And what's interesting is a couple of things about that. So Daniel, said to the person who was over them, hey, listen, you call us whatever you want. Fine, we'll learn your literature, we'll do all these other things, but don't make us defile ourselves with this food we can't eat. And the guy was kind of like, but if you guys don't do very well, then I'm in trouble. And Daniel was able to negotiate and say, listen, 10 days, that's all I'm asking. Just give us 10 days. And, and if we don't look so good, then fine, we'll eat the food. They didn't go on a hunger strike. They didn't do anything radical. God gave Daniel favor and wisdom to be able to negotiate and navigate. And because Daniel did not abandon God and drew that line, God did not abandon him. And over through that time, not only did Daniel and his companions do just fine, they ended up looking healthier than the other Israelites or other Jewish people, folks from Judah, who were amongst them and who partook of the king's food. Now, quite a few things going on here. First, I want to circle back to the whole name thing. I want to just share this real quick. As many of you know, I work in the health center of a retirement community, continuing care facility. And when I was first hired 16 years ago, 16 years in the same job. I know back in the day that was commonplace. Today, that's just crazy talk. And I was first hired as the activity coordinator. Within a year, I was changed to a different area and got a new office, or as I like to have called it, a closet. And my title was then changed from activity coordinator to activity director, because I guess they figured I didn't simply coordinate, I directed. And then I think they kind of realized, well, activity was not really the right title. And so because, let's be honest, root canal is an activity, but it's not quite what I was there for. And so they took out the word activity and replaced it with recreation. And so then I found myself as the recreation director. And in the process, the other interesting thing is they decided my office that was originally a chart room, converted to an office, was then going to be converted back to a closet for storage of wheelchairs. So I was moved to a new office. But this was an upgrade. I had a window into another room. And so now I was the recreation director. And then eventually the higher ups or whomever realized that I didn't just do recreation at the facility. We kind of did a lot more and so on and so forth. So inevitably, my title was changed yet again to what it is now. And you are looking at the life enrichment director, because I enrich lives. Or at least so my title says. And I direct it. Oh no, that's a conductor. And then a new administrator, and with the new administrator came a new office. Now, not only do I have windows, they're windows to outside. I'm moving up in the world. But the interesting thing is, over the 16 years that I've been with this company, 4 different titles, 4 different offices, but the same job. And so, as I like to tell people, as Shakespeare once said, a rose by any other name would smell just as sweet. My point is Daniel got it. He didn't get hung up on the name. He knew who he was and who he was in the Lord. It didn't matter what other people called him. He knew who he was in the Lord. He knew he was Daniel. And he knew where to draw the line and where not to. And that's a very difficult thing to discern in life. Very difficult. I know for myself, like all of us, we get curveballs thrown at us. Where do we take a stand? Where do we draw a distinction? Where do we reject? How do we navigate through all this? We still need to live in this world. We still need to interact with others. And we sure as heck better have a clue as to what's going on in the world around us. See, Daniel, I think one of the things he realized is that, okay, if I'm going to get an education in the Babylonian customs and beliefs and culture and everything else, okay, fine. The more I know, the better I can navigate. And I think we as the church sometimes make that mistake that we think, well, we're in this world but not of it, and so therefore we'll push the world out there and stay over here. And as the expression goes, sometimes you can be so heavenly bound, you are no earthly good. But because they understood the culture that they were in, but they knew where to draw the line, the external stuff, the name, the culture, what was around them, that didn't affect them. But isn't it interesting? That which they ingested and put inside, that was what was important. We don't have any control over what's going on around us, but we certainly have control over what we put in us. And so we can't change Hollywood, but we can certainly control what of Hollywood we will ingest. We can't control the culture around us, but we do have control in terms of what we partake of and what we say no thank you to. We do not have control over the conversations that take place around us, but we do have control over which ones we internalize. We do have control over that conversation inside our head and, most importantly, in our hearts. Now, when it comes to the diet, and I will make this as a side note, when Daniel and his companions ended up being really healthy, I know there's been books put out there on this, and I've had some people try to use the book of Daniel as an example or as justification to a vegetarian diet and things of that nature to apply in our daily lives today. I'm not going to say that what Daniel ate and did not eat did not have some effect on his health. Maybe it did. I wasn't there. I didn't see exactly. But at the same time, I firmly, firmly believe that his health and the health of his companions was more of a spiritual thing than a physical thing. That was the hand of God. Because they appeared better and fatter than those who ate from the king's table. Now, real quick, I apologize. I know I'm going a little bit over my time, but I got one more story to share with you. Then I'm going to tie this up and we'll get you out of here. In Scripture, when it talks about fatter, you could almost substitute that with healthy. Now, I learned that back in the day, to be looked at as being fat was a good thing. How did I learn this? Good question. My first job one of my first jobs, my first real job out of college, I was working at a Jewish nursing home up in Philadelphia. Some of you have heard me kind of talk about that. It was an incredible experience. Truly, truly helped define who I am today in my worldview. I had the opportunity to work with a lot of people from a lot of different regions, a lot of immigrants, those who fled Russia when the last Tsar fell. It was there that I met for the first time a concentration camp survivor. I met individuals who went through the Great Depression. It was just life-changing experience for me in terms of learning what these folks went through. But I remember meeting, there was this one older gal, well, they were all old, one of the residents, and I was running this program called the Creative Work Center. And residents would come in and I would do different programs with them and so on and so forth. And there was this one resident, oh my goodness gracious, she ran me through the ringer. My very first day on the job is she is this and I didn't know this. It was like, I don't know, it was like granny hazing. It's like it was day one for me, and I'm running this program, and I'm running around the room trying to set up all these old ladies, these Jewish old ladies, in different things they're doing, making necklaces, so on and so forth, running ragged, and they're just giving me a hard time, even yelling out, "Oh, you're terrible! Oh, where'd they get this guy? Oh, we're gonna complain! Oh, we're gonna get you fired!" And I'm like fresh out of college, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. And then at the final end of the morning, when the program was over and their aides come and they're bringing them out, this one lady, the rest of my life, I will always remember her. The person was rolling her out, and I'm kind of like, hey, come again. And she said to the aide, hold on. And she patted me on the arm and she said, you're going to do just fine. It's like, okay. So I think it was a bit of a hazing. So in any case, so I developed a relationship with this gal, but she kept calling me fat. She would come in, she'd look at me, she goes, you look fat. I'm like, and I was in my 20s. So I was probably, heavens know what she would say if she saw me now. And I just kept thinking, why does this lady keep calling me fat? I thought we were friends. Thought I won her over. And she just and she would say with a big smile, you're fat. So finally, one of the aides could see the expression on my face, and she comes over to me and she goes, no, you have to remember, she's a survivor of the Great Depression. You look good. She's saying you look good. You look healthy. For them, having a little bit of weight is good. And I was kind of like, oh, it's a compliment. She was saying I was not skin and bones. She was saying I looked healthy. Funny story. Sorry, could not resist the temptation of sharing it. But that's where I learned that the older generations, if they call you fat, it's a good thing. And so in Scripture, when it says that they looked healthy and fatter than everyone else, it meant healthy. Now, as I said, this was, yes, there may have been a physiological, but not much. This was more about what God was doing in them internally, spiritually. And that when God works inwardly, it is seen outwardly. And so these young men from Jerusalem were immersed in the study of Babylonian culture, literature, and religion. Yet, despite all of that, they remained faithful to God, to the work of the prophets like Jeremiah and the others. They were in Babylon, but they were not of Babylon. Just as today, we are in the world, but if we wish to not be of the world, it means we need to prayerfully navigate through this world, discerning where do we draw that line? Where do we reject? Where do we say no? We may be in, but we are not of. God bless.